Lots of people have said for a long time now that Hollywood has gone creatively bankrupt. Why aren't they going bankrupt? Bankrupt. Is it about time? Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. You might not be aware of this. I wasn't until this morning. But Hollywood has released not one, not two, but three failed reboots just this month, if you can believe that. I couldn't believe it either. The most recent one, which bombed this weekend, was the Charlie's Angels reboot, which Bill is going to talk about in his segment this week. But also, and I can't believe I didn't know this because I'm a Ewan McGregor fan and I'm a fan of The Shining, but he did a reboot of The Shining called Doctor Sleep, which I didn't even know about. And that one failed. And what was the other one? Oh, yeah, Terminator, Dark Fate, which the trailer looked so good. I was so excited. And then I found out, nope, they had to stink up another reboot yet again. And I just, gentlemen, before we get to questions here, I just want to go over very quickly a track record of just reboots I could remember in my adult lifetime, since about the time I was 30 years old, and I'm 50 now. Godzilla, 2001 Planet of the Apes, 2002 Rollerball, King Kong, The Wicker Man, Superman Returns, Miami Vice, two Rob Zombie Halloween movies. The Day the Earth Stood Still with Keanu Reeves, which I'd totally forgotten about. It was so awful. Karate Kid. My kids loved the original. They couldn't even sit through the remake. Nightmare on Elm Street. They took all the fun out and tried to make him sympathetic. It was just awful. Conan the Barbarian. Total Recall. Sony made two forgettable Spider-Man reboot movies. Those were the two in between Tobey Maguire and the new guy. I don't even remember what those were about. They were just awful. 2013 Man of Steel. 2015 Fantastic Four, which was the horrible reboot of the horrible first movies. 2016 we got Wokebusters, Lady Ghostbusters. What are we calling that one? 2017 Dirty Dancing, the Tom Cruise Mummy movie. And I would like to give a special shout out, a special mention to every single Robin Hood, starting with the Kevin Costner 1991 disaster, Prince of People Not Even Trying to Be English. So there you have it. That was just a rapid fire rundown. Bill, you live there. You see these people every day. You've been involved in the industry. When you look at a track record like this, what's going through their heads? This time it's going to work?
As an editor in this town for 7 or 8 years, not at a particularly high level in terms of the shows I was working on, but certainly I was working on network shows. I was editing documentaries for Discovery and History Channel, and I edited a movie talk show for AMC for 5 years. And one of the processes involved in this is that you have to show at the very least in the early stages, and in some cases, every single episode, you have to basically show the finished the assembly of a show to the network executives, and the network executives sign off on it. The best way I can put the kind of comments that we got from the network executives would be if I'd submitted a rough cut of Schindler's List and somebody had come back and said, this movie's a little bit heavy. I think what would really help it would be a talking dog. What if there's a talking dog that okay. So the talking dog thing is something that a lot of us writers and editors use when we're talking about Hollywood executives. And the reason we're saying this is because in order to become a Hollywood executive is not a creative position. It's an administrative position. It's a managerial position. But the problem is it's managing art forms, and they don't know what an art form is. And most importantly, you'd think in many cases they'd have the good sense to just be quiet. But then the question is, if I don't put my fingerprints on this script or this edit or whatever, speaking as a network executive now, if it doesn't have my fingerprints on it, sooner or later, they're going to start wondering why they're paying me $400,000 a year. So I have to make a comment about this. I have to put something in there. And now we're limited to what is the range of imagination of Hollywood executives. And it's rather small because in order to climb the ladder in Hollywood, you really need the same. I'm talking about on the business side. I'm not talking on the artistic side. You need the same things you need in order to climb through climb the ladder in Washington or in the Pentagon, for that matter. You need to have the skill of being able to find the important people and telling them what they want to hear and making it reflect on you as well as possible. It's almost the antithesis of a genuine artist who's determined that they're going to keep their work intact no matter what, no matter if they starve to death, no matter if it takes them 50 years, and so on and so on and so on. So when you have a group of people who are as uncreative as this, essentially businessmen, and let's not even talk about their business practices, but essentially businessmen dealing with artistic material. That's what they're selling. That's the widget. It's art. It's lightning in a bottle. Then you find that you run up against the limits of their imagination, and the limits of their imagination is to take something that already exists and make it again or change it a little, because that's technically something new, but it doesn't require all the effort necessary to come up with a new script. And I think the best thing I ever heard about this idea that business executives are able to determine what a movie's going to do or when a video is going to go viral. I heard directly from Peter Guber, who was a producer of many films and a Hollywood big shot. And I worked with him for 5 or 6 years on Sunday Morning Shootout. And Peter Guber tells the story of, I think it was, he and his partner, I think they brokered the sale of Universal to Sony, to Japan.
Oh, was it Columbia or Universal?
It was one of those two, and I don't remember.
I know this story. It's a great one.
I forgot, but let's just say it's Universal, since I'm probably wrong and I've already made the mistake.
Okay.
But basically, what happened is Peter Guber, who had worked in Hollywood as a producer his entire life, found himself and his partner sitting in a boardroom of executives at Sony Corporation. These are Japanese businessmen who become exceedingly rich by manufacturing top quality electronics at the lowest possible price. And in order to try and explain how Hollywood works, Peter Guber would say, we do a slate of movies. We do, let's just say easy numbers. Let's say that our studio, the studio that we want to sell you, will do 10 movies a year. And of those 10 movies, 3 of them will be hits, 4 of them will do okay, and 3 of them will be utter bombs. And the studio executive looked at him right in the eye and said, why don't you just make the hits?
Make that viral video for me, Bill.
But this is a profound insight into how businessmen and art interact and intersect. And so when you get to the mentality of why don't you just make the hits, you don't want to take a risk. You want to go with something that's known, that is going to return your investment. You're not going to do something new. The Godfather would be impossible to make today. I just don't think it could be made. But The Godfather was The Godfather because Francis Ford Coppola was ready to live and die on that hill, right? And they realized they had a bright guy and they left him alone. But it couldn't be made today. So in any event, that's basically the long form of the answer is reboots get made because people who make the decisions to greenlight movies are not people with the artistic merit to determine that this script is an extraordinary script. What's it a remake of? Nothing. It's brand new. It's going to go out of the park. Well, we don't know that. It's never been tried. Let's go ahead and do another version of Planet of the Apes. And it's really pretty simple. You have business people making artistic decisions.
Ouch. And just not good ones. You know, the back in the studio days, the studio bosses, I'm talking about the 1930s and 40s and 50s, the studio bosses just wanted to sell a lot of tickets, and they were the decision makers. They were. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I know I've been talking too long, but there's an important thing that you said here, and this is why movies have drifted away and not become representative of the American people. When in the golden age of the studios owned the theaters. Paramount movies would be shown at Paramount theaters.
Yep, until about
and
1950.
That was decided that's a monopoly, so they broke it up. But 2 things happened when they broke it up. First of all, if Paramount Studios is making movies for Americans who are going to Paramount theaters, they have to make movies that are going to bring people in America. They're not going to make their money in China or anywhere else. They've got to make that theater work. So that was incentive for them to make the kind of movies that Americans wanted to see. But even more importantly than this is it cut the feedback loop. It cut the feedback loop. It cut the ability for an audience to say, no, we're not interested in this. And then the studio says, well, they're not coming to my theaters and therefore we're in trouble. So let's not do that again.
Yeah, it's a shame. Scott, Bill raised a point about the business end of it, and you raised an interesting point, pardon me, when we were talking about this backstage, which was, does Hollywood actually have a higher failure rate than any other industry? And I think Bill mentioned the restaurant industry, which I think half of all restaurants go out of business in their first year, usually because they're undercapitalized. They just don't have enough cash to last long enough to build a clientele. Do you think it's the case that we are making too big of a case out of all these unimaginative reboots, and maybe we should just be thankful for the good movies that somehow slip through and get made?
I think it was William Goldman who said something to the effect of nobody in Hollywood knows anything.
And nobody knows nothing, is what he said.
And I think that that's not just restricted to Hollywood. I read a book years ago called The E-Myth. And one of the central tenets of this business book was that if you got behind the veil in any corporation, no matter how polished they looked in front of the public, you'd find utter chaos. That every company is just pedaling as fast as they can and trying to keep up with change and with unplanned circumstances and with failed enterprises and bad employees and all that kind of stuff. And so I think, yeah, to a certain extent, Hollywood, unfortunately, every time they come out with a new product, they unveil it in front of the entire nation. So if it flops, it's a big deal that it flops. They don't, even though they have a system for prototyping things and for market testing and focus grouping things, it's not the most effective system in the world. And it's subject to a lot of manipulation, especially with the phenomenon that Bill talked about, where you've got too many cooks in there trying to spoil the broth and everybody wanting to make themselves look good and then distance themselves from the things that don't look good. But I began to think, Steve, while you were talking, what movies do I really love that I want to see a remake of? I would say none of them.
No.
You know, it's
they
like
told the story. If it's a great movie, that means they told the story really well.
Ladies and gentlemen, Paramount Pictures releases Mr. Smith Goes to Washington Again. No, I don't. You know,
Smith Goes Back to Washington.
It's a really wonderful life this time. You know,
Skyscraper 2, Skyscraper-er. This time it's taller.
The next door neighbor's field of dreams. I mean, it's just like nobody wants a remake
soccer
of the things that they really like.
And nobody comes. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, who's even going to do that? And so I just think that's part of it. The other thing is, in a sense, when you write a movie, you kind of lay it all on the field. I mean, this is a story. You've got a protagonist. You've got an antagonist. You've got a problem. You've got a climax. You've got a resolution. And that's a complete entity, and you've given it your all. And then to say, hey, that went pretty good. Let's see if we can do that again. I think one of the reasons why Star Wars has been as successful as it has been, but yet not entirely successful in all its iterations, is because George Lucas came in with 9 movies. I mean, he started out, he didn't just have a movie and say, hey, let's do a remake of that. He already had in his head that there were going to be 9 movies. And so that, I think, helped to create an arc that was least survivable. The other thing that I think is disturbing about the whole business is this idea that you can't have an original idea anymore. Like nobody's willing to take a risk on saying, you know what, that kooky guy with that crazy idea, let's put some money on him. Let's give it a shot. Which is why some of the best stuff being made today is being made on the internet. It's being made by, even when you look at derivative pieces like fan films, some of the best stuff is coming from individual producers who gather around them a group of buddies who can act and shoot video and edit and stuff like that and make something fantastic because they don't have a bunch of bean counters looking over their shoulder and all they have is their own internal drive to get something on the screen. And I think that's what's really lacking. When my wife tells me, oh, there's a sequel to so-and-so that's coming out, or they've done a remake to such and such, you really have to push me to go to see such a film. And as I've said many times, the only reason I go to any movies is so I can sit next to Stephanie and hold her hand. But I just think that we all, in all of our careers, ought to be thinking in terms of what can we do that's a unique expression of who we are, not just a rehash of something somebody else already had a hit with.
Well, I got a couple of things I didn't even know I wanted to say. I'll wrap this as quickly as I possibly can, though. I made that bad joke about Skyscraper. I tried watching that movie. It was so aggressively stupid, I turned it off, and I almost never do that. I sit through a lot of crappy movies because I like
Was that
movies.
the Rock movie?
Yeah, with Dwayne Johnson. And the thing is, if you remember the 90s, every movie was, Die Hard was such a splash in the late 80s that in the 90s, every movie was a variation on Die Hard. It was Die Hard on a battleship. It's Die Hard on an airplane, right? Well, I'm trying to figure out what the pitch was for Skyscraper. It's Die Hard in an office tower. Well, Die Hard was in an office tower. That is just exactly how out of ideas Hollywood is right now, and it's really kind of sad. But let me give a shout out to the reboots that do work. One of them is I've watched the first couple episodes of The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, and it's not great, but it's quite good. And I'll settle for quite good in the Star Wars universe. I thought Rogue One was quite good. I've watched it a couple, 3 times now. It's such a
Battlestar Galactica was better than the original.
Yeah. When something is reimagined well, not just redone, you can hook people in and maybe improve on that, or at least revisit a beloved universe like the Star Wars universe in a new and well done way. And I think The Mandalorian does that. But maybe the best example, because you've got it on both ends of the spectrum here, is there was I think it was a novella-length sci-fi story from the early 50s called The Body Snatchers, which got made into a very famous movie, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I think in 1956. And it's really it's a classic. And it got remade in 1978 as Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and then again in 1993 as Body Snatchers, and again in 2007 as The Invasion. Well, let me tell you, I loved the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because the original was this sort of warning about hidden communists taking over and turning us into pod people. And the 1978 remake it had a different take on the same story. It was a warning about the dangers of conformity. And what a better place to set that story than to take it out of rural America, where we were worried about, hidden communists, and to set it in San Francisco, which at the time was the most nonconformist city maybe in the country. And so they had something new to say. It was interesting and creepy in a different way. And then the 1993 version had a third take on it, and it was about the dangers of fascism. And they took it back out of the big city and put it on a military base. And again, it was a fresh take, and it was the same story, but retold in a way that engaged your brain. And the 2007 version was made as a payday for Nicole Kidman, and that's exactly what it played like. So Hollywood, if you're paying attention at all, you can tell the same stories. You can go back to the same universe, but what you need is a fresh idea and execution. If you can do that, you're going to get my money, and you're going to get my butt in the seat every time, because Americans, we love movies. Just make some good ones, okay? And that's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. I'm sorry for going on so long, but as you can tell, all 3 of us just love this subject. If you like content like this, we need members like you. So click on over to BillWhittle.com, become a member. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.